My chapter from Change Wars is by Jonathan Jansen, a force of change in South African universities and throughout the world as a contributor to the literature concerning post-conflict pedagogy. This pedagogical approach links reconciliation pedagogies, mutual vulnerability, and humanizing pedagogies, and associates them all with the broader framework of critical pedagogy most frequently associated with Paulo Freire. Jansen's chapter is entitled, When Politics and Emotions Meet, Educational Change in Racially Divided Communities. Jansen's work poses challenging questions about our own view of race, but also about the larger questions of ethnicity, gender identification, sexual orientation, and other divisive us versus them identifiers. His work also questions the uncomfortable acknowledgement that feelings do indeed exist in the work environment. To begin our time together, please reflect on the following questions to help us identify with an issue that may seem disconnected from our own reality. Underscoring our entire discussion today is an understanding of the distinction between race and ethnicity. Biologists acknowledge that we are all members of one race, Homo sapiens. A Scientific American article in 2016 stated that race categories are weak proxies for genetic diversity, which basically means that humans' genetic diversity is so vast and complex as to defy simple categorization. Anthropologists support this idea with their long-held belief that the concept of race is purely a social construct to identify differences that separate us for the benefit of the stronger group. Ethnicity, however, is an aspect of culture that connects and unites people of similar genetic backgrounds, but at the same time, it can be used to divide people socially. This distinction underscores the complexity of Jansen's work, because the issue of race in South Africa is not as straightforward as black versus white. A quick review of the country's history, and my apologies if this reviewing is something you already know, will help show why distinguishing between race and ethnicity is important when looking at the emotions that Jansen encountered in his role as a black change leader in white universities. The earliest settlers to Southern Africa were from the Netherlands, and over generations they developed their own cultural and ethnic identity, separate and distinct from the Dutch, including the evolution of the language Afrikaans. Their economy was predominantly based in agriculture, but when diamonds were discovered, the area became a hotbed of contention for imperial powers such as Germany and Great Britain. At the Congress of Vienna in 1815, that resolved issues arising from the French Revolution and subsequent Napoleonic Wars, South Africa was ceded to the British as a redistribution of global European power that initiated the age of imperialism. British colonialism in South Africa presented in many of the same ways it did in other parts of the globe. They outlawed speaking Afrikaans and discriminated against the Afrikaners in other ways as well. In 1834, slavery was abolished, which hurt the farming economy, and eventually the displaced Dutch farmers, known as Boers, were subsequently replaced by British immigrants who were enticed to come to South Africa under the tenets of imperialism and the burgeoning diamond mining economy. As a result of this increased tension, there were two Boer Wars between 1880 and 1902 that ran concurrently with the Zulu Wars between the British and indigenous tribes. Because of this colonial history, there has been a tremendous distrust and antagonism between British and Afrikaners. Compounding these ethnic tensions was the influx of Indians, who migrated to the area as part of the Commonwealth due to indentured servitude needed after the end of slavery. You may remember that Gandhi was part of this Indian movement. With the final collapse of British imperialism at the end of World War II, the independent South Africa legalized the practice of apartheid, the official policy of racial separation throughout the country based on skin color, not ethnicity or cultural identification. Apartheid benefited the Afrikaners solely because of their whiteness, but did not necessarily unify them philosophically with British descendants. Personalities such as Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela emerged as leaders of the anti-apartheid movement and struggled to end systemic legal discrimination based on skin color, a fight that occurred 2 to 3 decades after other Western countries addressed similar issues. Since the end of apartheid almost 3 decades past, the country has been through numerous challenges in all areas of society. As Jansen so eloquently states, all members of South Africa have engaged in the process of balancing tensions of affirmation and inclusion, retention and restitution, caring and correction, accommodation and assertion, and racial reconciliation and social justice. Jonathan Jansen had a very typical upbringing one might expect of a young black man in South Africa in the 1950s. He completed his undergraduate work in South Africa, and his first professional experience was as a high school biology teacher before entering academia. The most important distinction from his time at Pretoria and Free State is that he was the first Black to hold these posts. While there is certainly contention concerning Jansen's role as a Black leader in historically white universities, the predominant feeling concerning his impact on the educational and political environment of South Africa in the last 2 decades is best demonstrated through the words of a policy analyst at the South Africa Institute on Race Relations. This letter was published shortly after Jansen announced his resignation from the Free State to begin his Stanford Fellowship. You are amongst these very few South Africans who inspire me as a young writer on matters of politics and economics, not because you are a classical liberal or libertarian. In fact, I do not know which philosophy guides you in your intellectual work. But here's what I know. You do believe that it's we, the people, who can make South Africa a prosperous and educated nation, not politicians. And that alone, from a man of your stature in South Africa, encourages me to soldier on in my efforts to advance liberty and economic freedom. The following BBC video gives a brief introduction to the integration of the University of the Free State, where Jansen was president. The article ties together the complex cultural legacy of South African history, particularly the damaging period of apartheid, with the ideas of post-conflict pedagogy and its connection with emotional aspects of change that we will learn about.
The University of the Free State, once dubbed the most racist in the land. Yet Archbishop Desmond Tutu, champion of a rainbow nation, has just been feted with a degree, an act of reconciliation after racial tensions here.
This place could have gone up in flames.
2 years ago, this video shocked the world. Black cleaners forced to take part in a fake initiation rite, mocked by white students. Protests followed, along with a high-profile court case. Now reforms to break the racial stranglehold that dominates student life. When I visited the university less than 2 years ago, it was as if apartheid was still alive and kicking here. Halls of residence were segregated along racial lines, black and white students keeping their distance. Now, new rules, some of them harsh, a ban on alcohol and mainstream political parties, are designed to shake things up. It appears to be working. White students and black now live under the same roof. Unthinkable just a few years back. A strict quota system is in place. Colour, no reason to stay apart.
He's got his mother's 4 children. My mother has 4 children.
Studying law, and we
Studying law.
Background for these roommates, a stronger bond.
And we all whites and blacks, I think we're getting along a lot better. Yeah, I think so.
Some parts in the university have changed, but Free State as a whole, I think it hasn't changed.
Traditions run deep in this part of the world, but on campus, one man with the burden of history on his shoulders is on a mission to reform. The first black Vice-Chancellor, Jonathan Jansen.
The biggest difficulty with change is how to give a sense of continuity with the past.
It's the mindset of the students that need to change.
When I came to the Free State, it was shocking to have to be exposed to a kind of area where you have to be sure of where you belong.
Professor Jansen's drive to bridge the racial divide has made him some enemies in a country where colour defines everything, but it is blazing a trail.
This is huge, not for this campus. I mean, this is a very small part of South Africa, but for this country, and hopefully also for people in other parts of the world.
The university is trying to reverse the damage of the past, but it's also shaping a future where the colour card is no longer played. Karen Allen, BBC News, at the University of the Free State.
Jansen posits 7 theses in this chapter as, quote, a platform for thinking about a new politics of emotions in pursuing educational change. I haven't presented these ideas in the same order given in the book. Rather, they're grouped together as similar tenets to show the complementary nature of the ideas. Universities, schools, all organizations have a cultural life that transcends the aggregate emotions of the people who work there. The organization has a life of its own that is unspoken and transmitted through traditions. When we try to change culture without acknowledging the emotional character of the organization itself, we do not create true change. Jansen calls knowledge in the blood as the organizational history that aligns with the emotional character of the institution. These components come together in ways that can be irrational at times because they are based in emotions and history, and history is not always remembered accurately or free of passion. Post-conflict pedagogy forces us to realize that war, trauma, and crises have their effect on people and society long after the event itself. Much like people suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, organizations also suffer from changes in culture, external forces, and societal impacts. We cannot hide from the elephant in the room. Leaders must acknowledge the reality of the feelings of individuals as they present in conjunction with the organization's history. We must name the feelings in order to find true reconciliation. In addition to naming others' feelings, as leaders, we must search our own history with discrimination or being part of the other when addressing race and ethnicity issues. Even if our problem of practice does not deal directly with race, we must examine our biases in whatever area we are looking at in order to see how they impact our thinking. After we identify our own biases, we must envision what the environment will look like once the change has occurred. What behaviors will we see in others? And then act as if that is currently the state, as a model for others. The environment also plays heavily in influencing the behavior and thinking of others. Teachers in classrooms, facilitators in social organizations and clubs, administrators in offices must create a climate in which people feel safe to productively share their feelings and emotions. This does not mean making excuses for bad behavior, but acknowledging their source and providing correction as needed without creating victims or evildoers. We must also recognize that all parties may be experiencing hurt. Given the turbulent history of South Africa, Jansen acknowledges that there is not only hurt among Black students, but among all students. Afrikaners feel a sense of falsely persecuted by Blacks because they are wrongly associated with British South Africans, when they also have a legacy of discrimination, war, and alienation. Teachers who grew up under apartheid have a different lens than their students who have no living memory of the practice. To revisit Jansen's words from earlier in our discussion, these 7 theses help balance affirmation of hurt with inclusion of all members as part of the group. They correct ill behavior with caring. They accommodate feelings while asserting new powers, and they seek reconciliation with justice. While none of us are dealing with situations as drastic as rebuilding society in a post-apartheid world, to some extent, many in our cohort are addressing issues of ethnicity, cultural identity, and organizational personalities. And all of us can identify an emotional component that impacts our workplace. In my school, the introduction of standards-based grading and RTI have evoked emotions centered around teacher identity. They're changing from information deliverers to learning facilitators, which involves feelings of lost autonomy, mistrust of a new system that is drastically different from anything they experienced as a student or learned in teacher school, and fear of looking incompetent if they don't understand the concept immediately. Some of the teachers who have really engaged with the new system, some even to the point of experimenting with aspects of it this year, have seen the amazing transformation in their practice and are elated to see an impactful result among student efficacy and performance. Others are still skeptical, observing the early adopters with hopeful anticipation and residual doubt. I can see these disparate feelings presenting among all the faculty as manifested in their behaviors, but not everyone has the vantage point I do, and their view of the change is limited to their own experience and those of their immediate friends. Ellis's quote comes from Cotter's The Heart of Change. He presents an idea concerning one way to emotionally engage people around an opportunity through a visual experience of all their feelings, not just their narrow lens. He refers to this as the emotional waveline. If one conducts a keyword search of emotional waveline, most returns focus on the consumer experience of buying a product. Anyone who has purchased a new entertainment system has experienced the confusion of choosing the system, the frustration of getting it home and hooking it up, the thrill of watching the first movie or big game on it, and more than likely or not, the pure anger of having it crash right at a key point. The same sequence of feelings applies to the introduction of change in organizations. In an emotional waveline, the feelings are aligned along one axis and a timeline of the change along the other. Ellis's example assumes a neutral starting point, but that's rarely the case. Each person will start in a particular place and move through the journey at a different pace with different emotions. However, there will be generalities among the entire organization, much like Jansen described in the emotional character of an organization being separate and distinct from the individuals involved. When I learned of the emotional waveline, I wondered if mapping the emotions that our teachers are feeling might help them see that all of the feelings associated with the transitional stages of change and see that each emotion is normal. Would the naysayers be able to continue their debate if they can see the journey of everyone else? Could those who have fully embraced the change serve as a comfort in helping move those who are curious but still dubious along the path? Will everyone gain a sense of, oh look, here's the expected scariness we knew would come, and then be able to progress without losing all hope? I also looked at Sammy's POP, and it addresses the programs that support university students who are recovering from drug, alcohol, and other addictions as they navigate the already pressure-laden world of college. In an environment known for partying and experimenting with the first taste of freedom, how do universities create additional supports for students who are addressing emotional stresses of addiction? The university itself has stresses placed upon it by government mandates for retention and graduation rates, and the unique organizational personality, coupled with the feelings and passions of the university staff who are involved in the program, all must be considered in the success of the intervention. There are at least 3 different groups of feelings happening concurrently: the students, the staffers, and the organization, that all must be brought into alignment for success. Now, looking at some other major works by Jansen, some of them apply to higher education in K-12 schools, but one that may be of interest to all of us is Letters to My Children. The publisher calls Jansen South Africa's moral barometer, and he talks to young people in his 140-character bursts through new media with some old-fashioned advice about how to conduct their lives as strong and caring citizens who live life to the fullest. In this book, Jansen explains his thinking behind his tweets that cover subjects ranging from politics to love and relationships to being a student and ensuring that you question the status quo. Now, with apologies to my colleagues who are not in K-12, I chose to highlight How to Fix South Africa's Schools because of its connection to my POP. As we see in reviewing his list of 8 mistakes that administrators in South African schools make, there are numerous similarities with what we have identified as failures of U.S. schools. Although I work in international schools, the idea of overburdening teachers and introducing too many innovations at one time resonated with me. Now, some of you outside K-12 may also identify with some of these mistakes, such as too many initiatives, focusing on pathology, or focusing on putting out fires rather than creating systemic change, and then patting ourselves on the back for being innovators. A final thought from Jansen should speak to all transformational leaders. Surround yourself with people on the same mission, who know more about other critical areas than you do, and who don't serve as rubber stamps for your ideas. Engage outward. Take risks in recruiting outsiders to be part of your team and empower them to act. As we reflect back on our opening provocation, have Jansen's ideas about acknowledging the role of emotions in organizations resonated with your own experience concerning discrimination or being the outsider? To help us connect around a central idea in our discussion forum for Chapter 8, please use the opportunity to respond to the following. In what concrete ways can I honor emotion and feeling in my POP or during other times of systemic change in my organization? Thank you so much for your engagement during our time together. I hope you had a similar experience to mine as I read the chapter. What first seemed like a topic so far removed from my own problem of practice evolved into something applicable to my own growth as a change leader. I look forward to continuing the dialogue in our discussion forum.